Night shift foreman Robert Chen couldn't shake the feeling something was wrong. The sound, or rather, the absence of sound, from Section K-7 bothered him. In a factory where one B-24 Liberator bomber rolled off the assembly line every 63 minutes, silence was unnatural. It was wrong. Behind him stretched 3.5 million square feet of factory floor, the largest room under one roof in the world. Ahead, in the shadows between the half-assembled fuselages, something had stopped the rhythm of production. Between those 2 points, 9 men had vanished over 14 months without anyone asking the right questions. The Willow Run plant was Henry Ford's answer to Air Marshal Arthur Harris's skepticism. When Harris dismissed American production capabilities in 1941, claiming the Americans couldn't possibly manufacture heavy bombers at scale, Ford took it personally. Within 6 months, he'd purchased 975 acres of farmland along Willow Creek, 25 miles west of Detroit. By March 1942, the factory was operational, a single continuous building 1 mile long, a quarter-mile wide. But size created problems nobody anticipated. The plant operated 24 hours daily, 3 shifts, 42,000 workers at peak capacity. You could walk for 20 minutes and never see the same person twice. Sections were designated by letter and number, A through P, 1 through 12. Some areas, particularly those handling classified military components, operated behind locked doors with restricted access. Night shift, midnight to 8 a.m., was always understaffed. Management focused on daytime production numbers. Nobody watched the dark hours too closely. That's when he hunted. The first disappearance was Thomas Welch, 34, October 1941, during the plant's shakedown phase. Welch was a riveter from West Virginia, experienced in aircraft assembly, recruited specifically for his skills. He'd written his wife Martha that the money was extraordinary, $1.25 per hour, double what he made back home. He mentioned strange things about the plant in his letters. How easy it was to get lost in the maze of assembly stations. How some sections remained empty even during full production runs. How the night shift felt different, quieter, almost predatory. His last letter, dated October 23, mentioned a transfer to Section K-7, night detail. "They need experienced men for sensitive work," he wrote. "I can't say much, but the pay is even better. If this keeps up, we'll have that farm paid off by spring." Thomas Welch never wrote again. His final paycheck was mailed to Martha on November 8, along with a tersely worded termination notice, voluntary separation from employment. No forwarding address provided. Martha's letters to Ford Motor Company went unanswered. When she traveled to Michigan in December, spent her savings on train fare and a boarding house, she was told Thomas had quit without notice. Personnel had no information beyond the file notation. The plant was too big, they explained. 40,000 workers. People came and went. Her husband must have moved on to another job, perhaps in California where shipyard work paid even better. She returned to West Virginia with 3 children to feed and mounting debts. The farm was foreclosed in 1943. Between October 1941 and March 1943, 8 more men vanished from Willow Run's night shift. All shared certain characteristics: single or separated from families, skilled workers, few local connections, assigned to Section K-7 during their final weeks of employment. All received the same terminal notation: voluntary separation. Nobody connected the disappearances because nobody was looking at the pattern. The plant's personnel department processed hundreds of terminations monthly. Men fired for drinking, men who couldn't handle the production pace, men who simply walked away from the grinding monotony of assembly line work. 9 files among thousands raised no flags. But Robert Chen noticed. Chen, 45, had managed factory floors for 20 years. He'd worked Ford's River Rouge plant before Willow Run, understood production flow like a musician understands rhythm. When machinery stopped, even briefly, he sensed it. When workers failed to maintain pace, he knew before supervisors reported it. When men disappeared from his section, he remembered their names. By February 1943, he'd noted 6 names. Men assigned to K7 who never completed their shifts, never picked up final paychecks, never returned for personal items left in lockers. 6 men who'd vanished as thoroughly as if the factory's massive machinery had simply consumed them. On March 16, he requested access to personnel files, claiming he needed to track turnover rates for efficiency reports. What he discovered made his hands shake while holding the documents. 9 men total. All night shift. All K7 assignment before disappearance. All within 17 months. The statistical probability was impossible. Turnover rates averaged 8% monthly across the plant, distributed normally across all sections and shifts. But K7 night detail showed 45% turnover, and every termination was marked voluntary separation, despite workers having left personal effects, unpaid wages, and in 3 cases, advance pay that remained uncollected. Men didn't walk away from money during wartime. Not when every dollar counted. Chen knew the answer before he consciously admitted it. Someone in Section K7 was killing these men. And whoever it was had access to personnel files, could forge termination notices, could make bodies disappear in a facility so vast that entire bomber fuselages got temporarily lost in the assembly maze. March 17th, he decided to investigate the only way that made sense. He'd join night shift himself, transfer to K7, and see what happened in the darkness between the half-built bombers. At 2:47 a.m. that morning, Robert Chen realized he'd made a terrible mistake. The silence from K7 wasn't absence of sound. It was wrong sound, wet sounds, dragging sounds, sounds of something heavy being moved slowly across concrete floor still slick with industrial oil. He walked toward Section K7, flashlight beam cutting through darkness between towering assemblies. The factory at night was different from day. Shadows pooled in corners the overhead worklights couldn't reach. The skeleton bombers, fuselages without wings, nose sections waiting for attachment, tail assemblies staged for integration, created a forest of aluminum and steel that transformed familiar workplace into alien landscape. Ahead, in the designated area where classified nose turret assembly occurred behind locked doors, Chen heard the sound again. Definitely dragging. Definitely heavy. Definitely wrong. He never reached Section K7. What he found instead, hidden behind a staging area for wing components, changed everything. A locker, standard issue, identical to hundreds throughout the facility. But this one bore no number, no name tag, no official marking. Inside, wrapped in industrial canvas tarps normally used for protecting finished components during transport, were personal effects. 9 sets of them. Wallets, watches, wedding rings, photographs of wives and children, identity badges that should have been returned to security upon termination, letters written but never mailed, addressed to families who'd never know what happened to their men. And beneath the personal items, carefully folded and stacked, 9 sets of clothing, laundered and pressed. Shirts with name tags still attached. Trousers with contents emptied, keys, coins, pocket knives, arranged in neat piles beside each outfit. Chen understood immediately. The killer was keeping trophies. Not the items themselves, those could be stolen for value. He was keeping the identity of his victims. Their names. Their faces in photographs. The evidence that they'd existed, had families, had lives beyond this factory floor. The wet dragging sound came closer. Chen extinguished his flashlight, pressed himself behind AB-24 nose section still missing its plexiglass panels. Through the aluminum skeleton framework, he watched a figure emerge from the darkness of Section K7. The man was tall, perhaps 6 feet 2 inches, wearing standard workers' coveralls that appeared freshly cleaned despite the hour. He pulled a wheeled maintenance cart, the kind used for transporting heavy tools and equipment between stations. Something large was wrapped in canvas on the cart, secured with rope in a way that suggested practice, experience, routine. The figure stopped 20 feet from Chen's hiding place, tilted his head as if listening, then continued toward the loading docks where morning trucks would arrive to collect waste metal shavings for recycling. Chen noted the badge on the man's coveralls, Section K, 7, Night Maintenance. Supervisor level access. Keys to every locked door in the facility. The man's face, briefly illuminated by a passing inspection cart's headlights, was unremarkable. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, the kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after seeing it. Ordinary. Forgettable. Perfect camouflage in a factory of 42,000 souls. Chen remained hidden until the figure disappeared into the loading dock area. Then he made his decision. He wouldn't confront the man. Not yet, not alone, not without proof beyond a locker full of personal effects that could be explained away. Instead, he'd document everything, photograph the evidence, contact proper authorities. But first, he had to know what was on that cart. He never got the chance. When he returned to the locker 20 minutes later, it was empty. Every item gone. The locker itself had been wiped clean, no fingerprints, no trace evidence. Even the canvas tarps had vanished. Chen reported what he'd seen to plant security at 6 a.m. when day shift began. The head of security, Malcolm Grayson, retired Detroit police sergeant hired by Ford in 1940, listened with professional patience, then explained why Chen must be mistaken. Section K, 7 had no night maintenance supervisor. The position didn't exist. The section operated with assembly workers only, no maintenance staff after 6 p.m. The badge Chen described couldn't exist because those badges weren't issued. When Chen demanded to see personnel files, Grayson's expression hardened. Those files are classified due to military contracts. I can't allow access without proper authorization. I had authorization yesterday. That authorization was rescinded this morning. Security protocols have been tightened. Chen understood then. The killer wasn't just operating within the factory. He was protected by it. He had access to personnel files, security protocols, areas supposedly restricted. He could make records vanish as easily as he made men vanish. The bureaucracy of war production had created a perfect hunting ground. Nobody questioned overtime hours or night shift assignments. Nobody tracked individual workers in a facility processing 40,000 people daily. Nobody investigated voluntary separations, when labor shortages meant replacement workers arrived faster than personnel could process termination paperwork. Robert Chen left Grayson's office knowing 2 things with certainty. 9 men were dead, and he would be the 10th if he continued investigating. He continued anyway. That night, Chen returned to the factory floor with a camera borrowed from a photographer friend, determined to document Section K-7 during operational hours. What he discovered was worse than finding bodies. Section K-7 shouldn't have existed at all. Robert Chen spent 6 weeks mapping the impossible. According to official factory blueprints, stored in the engineering office and reviewed quarterly by Army Air Corps inspectors, Section K-7 designated a classified nose turret assembly area, 8,000 square feet, located in the northwestern quadrant of the main building. The blueprints showed standard assembly stations, tool cribs, part staging areas, and restricted access doors leading to other classified sections. But when Chen physically measured the space, using a surveyor's wheel borrowed from the maintenance department, he discovered a discrepancy. The walls of Section K-7 measured only 6,400 square feet. 1,600 square feet of factory floor existed on paper but not in reality. Someone had built a hidden section within the official section. A factory within the factory. The revelation explained everything. How bodies could vanish without trace, how evidence disappeared before investigation, how a killer could operate for 17 months in the world's largest factory without detection. He'd literally built himself a private hunting ground, hidden behind false walls in a facility so vast that nobody had bothered to verify whether physical reality matched architectural plans. Chen's investigation became obsessive. He worked day shift officially but returned every night, mapping the facility, interviewing workers, tracking the patterns he'd begun to recognize. His wife Helen begged him to stop. "The money isn't worth your life, Robert. Whatever you found, report it and walk away." He couldn't. 9 men had families waiting for answers that would never come. He owed them truth, even if nobody else cared to find it. The pattern of victims revealed careful selection. Victim number 1, Thomas Welch, 34, October 1941, West Virginia riveter, wife and 3 children, skilled craftsman recruited specifically for aircraft experience. Last seen entering Section K, 7-4, specialized turret assembly training. Body never found. File marked, voluntary separation, November 8, 1941. Victim number 2, James Morrison, 41, December 1941, Kentucky welder, separated from wife, no children, former coal miner with metalwork skills. Transferred to night maintenance detail December 10th. Last paycheck dated December 20th. Mother in Lexington wrote 14 letters to Ford Personnel Department, received no response. Victim number 3, Samuel Chen, no relation, 28, February 1942, Chinese-American machinist from San Francisco, single, highly skilled in precision toolwork. Hired specifically for classified military contracts. Disappeared February 14th, Valentine's Day, Robert noted grimly. File notation, returned to California for family emergency. Family in San Francisco had reported Samuel missing to local police in March. Victim number 4, William Hartman, 38, April 1942, Illinois farmer turned factory worker, wife deceased 1940, 2 adult children. Experienced in heavy machinery operation. Last seen April 22 during night shift. Personnel file contained resignation letter, but handwriting didn't match Hartman's employment application signature. Victim number 5, David Torres, 32, June 1942, Texas native, Mexican-American, unmarried, skilled electrician. Transferred to Section K, 7-4, specialized wiring work, June 15th. Never collected final 2 weeks' wages. Brother Miguel, who also worked at Willow Run, searched for him for months before concluding David must have been deported despite being American-born. Miguel filed missing person report with Ypsilanti police. Case marked no evidence of foul play, presumed voluntary departure. Victim number 6, Robert Jameson, 45, August 1942, Canadian immigrant, single, expert in hydraulic systems. Hired July 1942, transferred to K, 7 August 10th, vanished August 29th. Immigration records showed no border crossing. Personnel file indicated return to Canada, but Canadian authorities had no record of entry. Victim number 7, Frank Sullivan, 36, October 1942, Boston Irish, married but wife remained in Massachusetts, former Navy mechanic with extensive aircraft experience. Wrote wife weekly, letters stopped October 15th. When wife traveled to Michigan in November, she was told Frank had quit and moved to California for shipyard work. Navy veteran organizations helped her. Search, found no trace. Victim number 8, Marcus Washington, 29, December 1942, Detroit native, African-American, one of relatively few black workers in skilled positions at Willow Run. Brilliant mechanical engineer, educated at Tuskegee Institute. Family well-connected in Detroit's black community, which meant his disappearance actually generated police investigation. Briefly. Case closed when personnel file showed resignation letter and transfer to rival manufacturer. Family insisted Marcus would never quit, was killed, they claimed. Police noted racial tensions at plant, suggested Marcus might have fled threats. Family knew better but had no evidence. Victim number 9, Anthony Kowalski, 43, February 1943, Polish immigrant from Detroit, wife and 5 children, desperately needed job to support family. Skilled in sheet metal work. Took night shift premium pay despite wife's objections. Last seen February 28th. Wife Anna reported him missing March 1st. Police investigation lasted 3 days before personnel file proved Anthony had quit. Anna insisted husband would never abandon children. She was right. She was also ignored. Chen documented everything: employment dates, last known locations, family contacts, physical descriptions, skills that got them assigned to K7. The pattern was clear. The killer selected skilled workers, men whose expertise gave them reason to access restricted areas. Men who were isolated, separated from families, immigrants, minorities whose disappearances might generate less institutional concern. Men who could vanish without immediate alarm bells because transient labor was expected in wartime industry. But finding the pattern and finding the killer were different problems. Chen's investigation hit walls everywhere he turned. Personnel files were suddenly classified due to wartime security protocols. Security logs from night shifts showed gaps, entire hours missing, as if recording equipment had malfunctioned repeatedly in precisely the same section. The maintenance supervisor roster listed no names for Section K7 night detail despite Chen having seen the man with his own eyes. Someone with high-level access was protecting the killer. Or someone with high-level access was the killer. On April 15th, Chen received an anonymous note slipped into his coat pocket: "Stop asking questions. 9 is enough. Don't make it 10. He showed the note to his wife that evening. Helen's hands shook as she read it. "Please, Robert. Report everything to the FBI and let them handle it. I've tried." Filed reports with FBI field office in Detroit. They said military production facilities fall under Army jurisdiction. Contacted Army CID. They said civilian employee matters are local police jurisdiction unless sabotage is proven. Called Ypsilanti Police. They said missing persons from voluntary employment termination aren't criminal matters. Everyone has a reason why it's not their problem. Then let it not be your problem either. But it was his problem. Because on April 28th, Robert Chen found evidence that couldn't be dismissed, couldn't be explained away, couldn't be buried by bureaucracy. He found where the killer kept them. The discovery came accidentally. Chen was tracking electrical usage patterns across the facility, trying to identify any section showing power consumption inconsistent with official operations. Section K7 showed normal usage for daytime assembly work. But between midnight and 4 a.m., power consumption spiked dramatically, suggesting heavy equipment operation despite official records showing no night maintenance scheduled. Following electrical conduits meant accessing the factory's utility tunnels, the maze of passages beneath the main floor where pipes, wiring, and ventilation systems ran. Chen descended through a maintenance access hatch in Section F9, followed the main electrical trunk northward through darkness lit only by his flashlight, and emerged into a space that shouldn't exist. The hidden section of K7. It was approximately 40 feet by 40 feet, the missing 1,600 square feet from Chen's measurements. But instead of assembly equipment, the space contained something far worse. A workshop, meticulously organized, equipped with tools that had nothing to do with building bombers. Medical equipment, an autopsy table, surgical instruments arranged in precise order, bottles of formaldehyde, jars of preservatives. Workbenches, metalworking tools, welding equipment, an industrial saw whose purpose made Chen's stomach clench. Storage, locked cabinets whose contents he could guess, refrigeration units humming in the darkness, a furnace designed for metal casting but sized wrong, sized for something else entirely. And documentation. The killer kept records. A locked filing cabinet yielded to Chen's pry bar. Inside, photographs. Hundreds of them. Each victim, carefully posed, photographed at various stages. Alive, unconscious, dead. The progression documented like a scientific experiment. Beside each photo, handwritten notes in precise, almost obsessive script. Subject number 1. Observation of pain threshold under controlled industrial stress. Initial hypothesis: experienced craftsmen demonstrate higher tolerance. Conclusion: pain tolerance unrelated to professional skill. Vocalization patterns suggest psychological factors dominant. Recommend refinement of methodology for future subjects. Chen read 9 files. 9 documented murders, described in clinical language that stripped away humanity and reduced men to subjects and deaths to experimental conclusions. The killer wasn't just murdering. He was studying them, treating human beings as experimental subjects in some grotesque research project that combined medical curiosity with industrial precision. The final file made Chen drop the flashlight. Subject number 10, Robert Chen, 45, production foreman. Chinese-American, military experience, Army Corps of Engineers, World War I, married, 2 children. Skills: production management, statistical analysis, observational acuity. Hypothesis: investigative persistence suggests enhanced pain tolerance and psychological resilience. Subject demonstrates awareness of experimental program, making him ideal candidate for testing conscious subject responses versus unconscious subject baselines established with subjects 1 to 9. Projected acquisition date: May 1, 1943. Location: Section K, 7 Utility Access, 2 a.m. The date was 3 days away. Chen understood immediately. The killer had known about his investigation from the beginning, had watched him investigate, tracked his progress, even facilitated certain discoveries. Chen wasn't hunting the killer. He was being studied, observed, evaluated as potential experimental subject number 10. The horror wasn't that he'd been marked for death. The horror was that his investigation itself had been part of the killer's experiment, testing how long an intelligent, determined investigator could survive before being eliminated. Chen climbed out of that hidden section knowing he had perhaps 72 hours to live unless he did something impossible. Identify and stop a killer protected by institutional authority, access to classified areas, and 17 months of successful operation. He had one advantage. The killer expected him to panic, to flee, to report findings to authorities who'd already proven useless. Instead, Chen did something the killer's careful psychological profile hadn't predicted. He set a trap. Robert Chen arrived 15 minutes early, which meant he had time to see what the killer had prepared for him. The utility access point had been modified. New locks installed, exits blocked, entire tunnel section transformed into a funnel with only one path forward, deeper into the hidden workshop, away from any possible escape. The killer had spent the past 3 days preparing his acquisition site like a spider building web geometry tailored to specific prey. But Chen hadn't come alone. Concealed in maintenance areas surrounding Section K, 7 were 7 men. Malcolm Grayson, the security chief who'd dismissed Chen's initial reports, 2 Detroit police detectives Chen had convinced to investigate unofficially, 3 workers from Chen's day shift crew who'd helped document disappearances, and 1 journalist from the Detroit Free Press who'd been investigating union complaints about unsafe working conditions. Each man carried weapons. Grayson his service revolver, the detectives their police .38 specials, workers with improvised weapons from the factory floor. Each man had specific instructions. Wait for Chen's signal, 3 flashlight blinks, then converge on the hidden section simultaneously, cutting off all exits. The trap wasn't to capture. The trap was to witness. Because Chen understood what 17 months of investigation had taught him. Without witnesses, without undeniable proof, the killer would disappear into bureaucracy's protective embrace, protected by wartime security protocols and institutional denial. Chen descended into the utility tunnel at 1:47 a.m. The lights were already on, work lights strung along the passage, illuminating the path to the hidden workshop. The killer was announcing his control. I know you're coming. I've prepared for you. Come and see what I've built. The passage branched twice, but new walls blocked alternative routes. Only one direction remained, forward, toward the light spilling from the workshop entrance. Chen reached the threshold at 1:52 a.m. The hidden section had been transformed. The autopsy table was prepared, restraints ready, surgical instruments arranged, the industrial saw positioned for easy access. But the organization of the space revealed something Chen hadn't fully grasped from his previous visit. This wasn't a hastily improvised murder site. This was a permanent installation, built during the factory's initial construction, integrated into the facility's design from the beginning. The electrical systems, plumbing, ventilation, all connected to the main building's infrastructure but routed through hidden conduits that wouldn't appear on standard maintenance inspections. Someone had designed this space before the factory even opened. Someone with access to architectural plans, construction schedules, installation permits. Someone involved in the facility's creation had built a hidden laboratory into the world's largest factory, knowing it would provide perfect cover for years of operation. Right on schedule. The voice came from behind a half-assembled B-24 fuselage staged in the workshop, probably stolen from the main assembly line, brought here piece by piece for some purpose Chen couldn't imagine. Your punctuality is admirable, Mr. Chen. It's one of several qualities that make you ideal for the next phase of research. The man who stepped into view was not what Chen expected. He was ordinary, exactly as Chen had observed during their previous brief encounter, but now, fully illuminated, the ordinariness itself became disturbing. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, medium height and build, wearing standard factory coveralls with a Section K-7 supervisor badge that definitely shouldn't exist. His face was the kind you'd forget 5 minutes after meeting. No distinguishing features, no memorable characteristics, perfectly average in every dimension. But his eyes. Chen hadn't been close enough before to see the eyes. They were completely calm, utterly empty of the emotions Chen associated with sanity. Looking into them was like looking into machinery, functional, efficient, devoid of human recognition. "Dr. Richard Wallace," the man said, extending his hand in a gesture so bizarrely formal that Chen almost laughed. "Chief Industrial Psychologist, Ford Motor Company, assigned to Willow Run Production Optimization. We've never been formally introduced, though I've been observing your investigation with considerable interest." Chen didn't take the offered hand. Industrial psychologist. The field is relatively new. Henry Ford understands that manufacturing at this scale requires not just mechanical efficiency but psychological optimization. Workers must be analyzed, their stress responses documented, their breaking points identified. How else can we maximize production during wartime crisis? Wallace lowered his hand, seeming unsurprised by Chen's rejection. "I was hired in 1940, before ground was broken on this facility. I helped design worker efficiency protocols, stress management systems, productivity incentive structures." "You designed this?" Chen gestured at the workshop. "This? No, this is personal research. Ford's official studies are far more mundane. Productivity metrics, absenteeism patterns, that sort of thing. But wartime provides unique opportunities for advancing psychological science. The military understands this. They conduct experiments in battlefield stress, combat fatigue, trauma responses. I simply applied similar methodology to industrial environments." "You murdered 9 men." "I studied 9 subjects," Wallace corrected, his tone patient, almost pedagogical. "There's a critical distinction. Murder implies criminality, emotional motivation, social deviance. My work is scientific observation of human responses under controlled stress conditions. Each subject provided valuable data about pain tolerance, psychological breaking points, physiological limits under industrial trauma." Chen felt bile rising. "You're insane." "I have IQ 152, 3 advanced degrees, 14 published papers in industrial psychology. I've revolutionized production efficiency protocols now used in 17 American factories. I'm the most sane person in this building, Mr. Chen. Everyone else accepts wartime sacrifice without questioning its mechanisms. I simply made sacrifice explicit, measured, useful to scientific advancement. The men you killed had families, lives. They weren't experimental subjects. Wallace tilted his head, genuinely puzzled. But they were. Every worker is a subject the moment they enter industrial employment. I merely extended the observation from passive productivity metrics to active stress response analysis. The data has been extraordinary. For instance, subject number 4, William Hartman, demonstrated pain tolerance 47% above baseline despite being a farmer with no military training. Meanwhile, subject number 8, Marcus Washington, broke psychologically within hours despite higher education and superior intelligence. The variables are fascinating. Chen understood then. Wallace wasn't making excuses or justifying crimes. He genuinely believed he was conducting legitimate research, saw no moral distinction between measuring production output and measuring human suffering. How did you get away with it? Chen asked, stalling, waiting for his signal moment. 17 months. 9 men. Nobody stopped you. Wallace smiled, the first genuine emotion Chen had seen, and it was pride. Institutional design. I helped create Willow Run's administrative systems, personnel protocols, security procedures, medical reporting structures. I built in inefficiencies deliberately, gaps between departments, conflicting jurisdictions, classification barriers. Nobody can investigate anything because every investigation requires approval from departments that don't communicate. It's beautiful, really. Bureaucracy as perfect camouflage. The security chief, Grayson. Is he involved? Malcolm. Wallace laughed. No, he's simply competent at following established procedures. When you reported suspicious circumstances, he checked my personnel file, saw my security clearance and Ford executive credentials, and concluded you were mistaken. He's not protecting me. He's protecting the system that employs me, which amounts to the same thing. And the families? The mothers, wives, children wondering what happened. Acceptable collateral damage in service of scientific advancement. We accept such damage constantly. Soldiers dying in war, workers dying in industrial accidents, civilians dying in bombing raids. My research will ultimately save more lives than it costs by optimizing human performance under stress. The 9 subjects sacrificed themselves for greater good, even if they didn't know it. Chan had heard enough. He reached for his flashlight to signal the converging team. Wallace moved faster. The blow came from behind, a second person Chan hadn't detected, striking the base of his skull with something heavy and metallic. Chen dropped to his knees, vision swimming, flashlight clattering away across concrete floor. Subject number 10, Wallace said, stepping closer. Your predictability disappoints me. Of course you'd bring help. Of course you'd plan an ambush. But you made one critical error. You assumed I worked alone. The second figure came into view as Chen's vision cleared. Younger man, early 30s, wearing maintenance coveralls. He carried a wrench the size of a baseball bat, still holding it ready for another strike. My assistant, Wallace explained. David Torres, subject number 5, remember? Except he didn't die. He became the first successful result of my stress adaptation research. 14 months of controlled trauma, psychological conditioning, identity dissolution, and behavioral reconstruction. He's quite loyal now. Aren't you, David? The young man who'd been David Torres nodded without speaking, eyes empty as Wallace's, face slack with an absence that suggested personality had been excavated and replaced with something else entirely. Chen understood the full horror then. Wallace wasn't just killing his victims. He was trying to break them, reconstruct them, turn them into assistants for future research. 9 attempts, 8 failures, 1 success. And now Chen would be the next test subject in Wallace's experiment in destroying and rebuilding human consciousness. Your associates will find nothing, Wallace continued, circling Chen like a lecturer addressing particularly slow student. David will ensure the exits remain clear. Your rescue party will arrive in approximately 4 minutes. I've been monitoring their positions throughout. But they'll find only an empty workshop and confused story about maintenance work. You'll be subdued, relocated to secondary research facility, and your investigation will appear to have dead-ended. Personnel will mark your file voluntary separation, like the others. Helen will receive your final paycheck. Your children will grow up believing you abandoned them. Chen tried to stand, failed, vision still swimming from the blow. Blood ran down the back of his neck. Wallace crouched beside him, pulling out a medical syringe. The sedative works quickly. When you wake, the real research begins. I've developed new techniques since David's conditioning. More efficient methods for psychological dissolution, improved protocols for behavioral reconstruction. You'll help me refine them. Your investigative skills suggest higher cognitive function, which makes you ideal for testing whether intelligence correlates with resistance to identity dissolution. I hypothesize it doesn't, but experimental confirmation is needed. The syringe moved toward Chen's neck. The gunshot was extraordinarily loud in the enclosed space. Wallace jerked backward, syringe flying from his hand, blood spreading across his shoulder. Malcolm Grayson stepped through the workshop entrance, service revolver extended, face grim with an expression Chen recognized, the look of a man who just confirmed his worst institutional fears. "I heard everything," Grayson said, voice shaking with either rage or horror. "Every word." I didn't believe Chen's reports, but I couldn't stop thinking about them. Couldn't stop wondering why personnel files didn't match my memory. Why security logs had gaps. Why you'd always be there when I had questions, offering explanations that made sense but never quite satisfied. He gestured with the revolver. "Step away from Chen. David, Torres, whoever you are now, drop the wrench or I'll put the next bullet in your chest." The young man who'd been David Torres stood frozen, wrench still raised, caught between Wallace's conditioning and immediate threat. The two Detroit detectives entered behind Grayson, weapons drawn, followed by Chen's workers and the journalist, who was scribbling notes furiously even while processing the nightmare scenario unfolding before him. Wallace clutched his shoulder, blood soaking through coveralls, but his expression remained calm, almost amused. "You can't prosecute me. Everything here is classified under wartime security protocols. Military contracts, restricted access, national defense considerations. You'll never get authorization to reveal what happened." "I don't need authorization." Grayson moved closer. "I need evidence. And that journalist behind me has already documented everything. No court will hear the case. Ford has 200 lawyers. The military won't allow exposure of security vulnerabilities. The FBI will classify everything as matter of national security." Wallace was still lecturing, still confident despite the gunshot wound. "I'll be transferred to different facility, continue my research under military sponsorship. Industrial psychology is too valuable to discard over squeamishness about methodology." "You're probably right," Grayson admitted. "The system will probably protect you. But I'm retired Detroit police, and I remember how we handled predators before lawyers got involved." The second gunshot was quieter, muffled by Wallace's body absorbing the bullet. The psychologist dropped to his knees, expression finally showing something other than empty calculation. Shock, pain, realization that his careful institutional protections meant nothing against a man who decided justice mattered more than procedure. "No," Chen gasped, trying to stand. "Not like this. He has to stand trial, has to face." "Face what?" Grayson interrupted, voice bitter. "Military tribunal behind closed doors? Psychological evaluation declaring him insane, transfer to federal hospital, eventual release when war ends and nobody remembers? That's not justice, Chen." That's letting the system eat its own crimes and call it resolution. Wallace collapsed fully, breathing ragged, blood pooling beneath him. You'll regret this. They'll prosecute you for murder. I'm Ford executive, military contractor, classified researcher. You're a man who killed 9 people and tried to kill a 10th, Grayson said flatly. Everything else is paperwork. The third shot ended Wallace's protests. Chen looked away, horror and relief warring in his chest. The 9 families would never get full answers. There'd be no public trial, no institutional accountability, no systematic examination of how a psychopath had been given keys to America's largest factory and told to optimize human performance. Wallace was right about that. The system would bury this as deep as the hidden workshop where he'd conducted his experiments. But Wallace was also wrong. Because the evidence was documented, photographed, witnessed by 8 men who'd now carry the story forever. The journalist would write it, even if editors buried it during wartime. The families would get closure, even if official records showed only voluntary separation. And David Torres, standing frozen with wrench still raised, might someday remember who he'd been before Wallace broke him. "Get Chen to hospital," Grayson ordered the detectives. "Torres, too. He needs psychiatric evaluation, not prosecution. This room gets photographed, documented, then sealed. Every piece of evidence gets catalogued. The families of those 9 men deserve to know what happened, even if the public never does." Chen was lifted by the workers who'd helped his investigation, carried toward the exit while his vision swam with shock and blood loss. Behind him, Grayson was already making calls to Detroit Police Chief, FBI Field Office, Army CID, every authority he could think of that might care more about justice than institutional reputation. The last thing Chen heard before consciousness faded was Grayson's voice, steady and determined. "I don't care about classifications or security protocols. 9 Americans were murdered at this facility. Their families will have answers. And if that means burning down Ford's bureaucracy to get them, then hand me the matches." Chen smiled despite the pain. Justice wouldn't be clean, wouldn't be complete, wouldn't satisfy anyone's sense of proper resolution. But it would be real, messy, and compromised, and better than silence. The hidden workshop of Section K-7 had claimed 9 lives. It wouldn't claim a 10th. That would have to be enough. The Willow Run murders never made headlines. Official records show only administrative notation. Security incident at Ford Willow Run facility, May 1943. 3 employees deceased: Wallace, Richard, Torres, David. Security Chief Malcolm Grayson self-inflicted. Cause: industrial accident during unauthorized maintenance. No production delays resulted. Case closed. The truth was more complicated, more political, more thoroughly buried. Malcolm Grayson survived. The self-inflicted notation was military fiction to explain his court-martial for killing an unarmed defense contractor during wartime. He served 18 months at Fort Leavenworth, released in 1945 with dishonorable discharge and pension revoked. He never expressed regret. "I killed a monster," he told the journalist who'd witnessed Section K-7. "If they want to court-martial me for that, fine. But those 9 families got answers. That's worth my pension." David Torres, subject number 5, Wallace's single successful experiment, spent 11 years at a psychiatric facility in Ypsilanti. Doctors documented his condition: complete psychological dissolution with residual conditioning responses. Patient demonstrates no recall of identity before May 1942. Behavioral patterns suggest extensive trauma-based conditioning now permanent. He died in 1954, age 34, from pneumonia. His tombstone, paid for by his brother Miguel, reads simply, "David Torres, beloved son and brother. Lost too young." Robert Chen recovered physically. The skull fracture healed, the nightmares didn't. He returned to factory work briefly but couldn't enter Section K-7 without panic attacks. Ford transferred him to River Rouge plant in 1944 with promotion to senior production manager. Obvious hush money, Chen knew, but he took it. His wife Helen never learned the full details of what happened that night. He told her only, 9 men died. I made sure their families knew why. She understood that was all he could say. The 9 families received settlements, substantial ones, routed through Ford's legal department with non-disclosure agreements attached. None of the families signed initially. All eventually did, worn down by poverty, legal pressure, and realization that no court would ever hear their cases. The money didn't heal the loss, but it paid mortgages, funded children's education, kept farms from foreclosure. Martha Welch, widow of victim number 1, used her settlement to finish paying off the West Virginia farm her husband had died trying to save. She never remarried. Her 3 children, James, Elizabeth, and Ruth, grew up knowing their father hadn't abandoned them, that he'd been murdered while trying to provide for his family. That knowledge didn't make his absence easier, but it preserved his memory with dignity. Anna Kowalski, widow of victim number 9, used her settlement to educate all 5 children. 2 became teachers, 1 a factory foreman, 1 a nurse, 1 a Catholic priest. At Anthony's memorial service, his body was never found, so burial wasn't possible. Father Joseph Kowalski, the youngest son, said, "My father died trying to feed us." That's not tragedy. That's sacrifice. The tragedy is that powerful men led a monster hunt among decent workers for 17 months before someone cared enough to stop it. The hidden workshop in Section K-7 was demolished in June 1943. Army Corps of Engineers sealed the utility tunnels, removed every trace of Wallace's installation, and reclassified the entire section as unauthorized construction, security risk, removed. The factory blueprints were retroactively corrected to show no discrepancy between planned and actual square footage. Official narrative was established. The space never existed, therefore nothing that happened there was real. But physical erasure couldn't erase memory. Workers at Willow Run began calling Section K-7 the dead zone. Productivity in that area dropped dramatically. Nobody wanted to work where 9 men had vanished, even if official records denied it. Night shift refused assignments there. The section was eventually repurposed for storage, removed from active production entirely. The journalist who witnessed Wallace's death, Paul Hendricks of the Detroit Free Press, wrote the story. His editors killed it immediately, citing wartime security restrictions and unverifiable claims. Hendricks kept the notes, photographs, documentation. He published it anyway in 1947, after the war, in a small literary magazine that folded 6 months later. The article was titled "The Factory That Ate Men." It was read by approximately 3,000 people, generated no institutional response, and was forgotten. Until 1958, when a graduate student in industrial psychology at University of Michigan discovered Dr. Richard Wallace's pre-war academic papers while researching the history of workplace efficiency studies. The papers were brilliant. Revolutionary insights into human stress responses, productivity optimization, behavioral conditioning. The student was fascinated until she found Wallace's final paper, submitted to Journal of Applied Psychology in March 1943, rejected for publication in May 1943. The paper was titled, "Stress Adaptation in Isolated Industrial Environments, Preliminary Results from Extended Observation of 9 Subjects." The student, Sarah Chen, Robert Chen's daughter, though she never made that connection until later, read the abstract with growing horror. This study examines human psychological responses under sustained industrial stress conditions. 9 male subjects, aged 28 to 45, were observed in controlled environment isolated from social contact. She brought the paper to her advisor, who read it and immediately contacted university administration. An investigation was launched, quietly, carefully. Ford Motor Company was contacted. Military archives were searched. Medical journals were reviewed for any mention of Wallace's research. Everything had been classified, buried, or destroyed. Except for Paul Hendricks' article, sitting in a University of Michigan library's collection of obscure journals. Except for Robert Chen, still living in Dearborn, who confirmed every detail when Sarah, his daughter, finally connected her research subject to her father's past. Except for the 9 families, who'd been paid to stay silent but never actually forgot. The revelation in 1958 generated brief academic scandal. Ford psychologist conducted unethical human research, which the company weathered through aggressive legal action and public relations campaigns. No criminal charges were filed. Wallace had been dead 15 years. Grayson was dead, heart attack, 1952. Most witnesses were gone or gagged by non-disclosure agreements. But the research protocols Wallace had developed, the efficiency measurements, stress response analyses, psychological optimization techniques, were quietly removed from Ford's industrial systems. Other companies using similar methods discontinued them. The field of industrial psychology underwent ethical reform, establishing guidelines about human subject research that specifically referenced the Willow Run case without naming it directly. Dr. Richard Wallace's academic papers were removed from psychology journals, his theories discredited, his name struck from industrial psychology histories. He became an unperson, academically speaking, present in footnotes only as cautionary tale about research ethics violations. The Willow Run plant continued operating until 1945, producing 8,685 B-24 Liberators, 1 bomber every 63 minutes at peak efficiency, exactly as Henry Ford had promised Air Marshal Harris. After the war, the facility was repurposed for automobile production, then sold, then demolished in sections. The last building was torn down in 2014. Today the site is part of a business park and General Motors battery assembly plant. Nothing marks the location of Section K-7. No plaque commemorates the 9 men who died there. No historical marker explains what happened in the hidden workshop beneath America's most productive factory. The story exists in fragments: classified military reports, sealed legal settlements, an obscure 1947 magazine article, academic papers about research ethics, family memories passed down through generations. Robert Chen died in 1979, age 81, surrounded by family. His obituary in the Detroit Free Press mentioned his distinguished career at Ford Motor Company, his contributions to production efficiency, his service during World War I. It did not mention that he'd saved lives by exposing a serial killer operating at the height of American war production. Sarah Chen, his daughter, the psychology student who'd rediscovered Wallace's crimes, spent her career studying institutional failures that enable abuse. She wrote the definitive academic text on the subject, Bureaucracy as Camouflage: How Organizational Structure Facilitates Criminal Behavior. Chapter 7 was titled The Willow Run Case, Industrial Psychology's Original Sin. Published in 1982, it remains required reading in ethics courses for industrial organizational psychology students. The 9 victims have no collective memorial, no shared monument. Their families scattered across America, carrying private grief and quiet anger that justice had been incomplete, buried beneath classified stamps and corporate legal protection. But they're remembered in other ways. Thomas Welch's great-granddaughter became an investigative journalist specializing in corporate crime. She cites her great-grandfather's story as inspiration for her work exposing institutional cover-ups. Marcus Washington's nephew became a civil rights attorney, fighting cases about workplace discrimination and unsafe conditions. He keeps his uncle's photograph on his desk, reminder of what happens when companies prioritize profit over human life. Anthony Kowalski's son, Father Joseph, spent 50 years in parish ministry, counseling families of industrial accident victims, fighting for worker safety regulations, never letting anyone forget that acceptable losses are never acceptable to the families who lose. The legacy isn't clean. Wallace was right that institutional protection would prevent full accountability. No Ford executives were prosecuted for hiring him, for creating administrative systems that enabled his crimes, for covering up what happened when evidence emerged. The military was never investigated for classifying evidence. The FBI never explained why reports were ignored. Nobody in authority faced consequences for the systematic failures that let 9 men die. But the truth survived, carried forward by people who refused to let silence be the final word. Today, the former Willow Run site is unremarkable. Parking lots, office buildings, light manufacturing facilities. Employees work there without knowing the history beneath their feet. Most never ask why Section K7 of the old factory layout remains blank on historical maps, or why that area was never photographed during war production documentation, or why Detroit area historians avoid discussing it when researching industrial history. The 9 families know. Sarah Chen's students know. Researchers studying industrial ethics know. And anyone who cares to look carefully at military archives, academic ethics cases, or legal settlements from 1943 can piece together what happened. 9 men died in the world's largest factory, killed by a psychologist who viewed human beings as experimental subjects in his research on industrial stress optimization. They died because institutional systems valued production over protection, because wartime security enabled secrecy, because bureaucracy created perfect camouflage for predatory behavior. Their deaths taught lessons that should be impossible to forget. That size creates hiding places, that efficiency can mask atrocity, that institutions protect themselves before protecting individuals, that silence is always easier than justice. But forgetting is what institutions do best. Section K7 doesn't appear on maps. Dr. Richard Wallace doesn't exist in psychology textbooks. The Willow Run murders are a footnote in histories of American war production. 9 families still carry names that never got full answers. 9 graves or empty memorial plots scattered across America, marking lives taken by a man who viewed human death as data collection. History buried the story. But burial isn't erasure. And erasure isn't permission to repeat the same failures. The factory is gone. The killer is dead. The victims remain. And the question that haunts anyone who learns this story remains too. How many other Section K7s existed in other factories, other institutions, other places where size and secrecy conspired to let monsters operate? How many still exist today? That question has no comfortable answer. Only the obligation to keep asking it.